Here's a question that sounds simple, but gets surprisingly interesting the more you think about it. Why are they called cowboys? If they mostly ride horses, shouldn't they be called horseboys instead? It's one of those everyday words we rarely question. We picture wide-brimmed hats, dusty boots, and someone riding across an open range, but the name itself doesn't seem to match the image. So today we're digging into where the term cowboy actually comes from, what these people really did, and why the name stuck. Right here, on History of Simple Things. The story of the cowboy doesn't actually begin in the United States. It starts in Spain. During the Middle Ages, Spanish ranchers developed techniques for managing large herds of cattle on horseback. When Spain colonized parts of the Americas, especially regions that are now Mexico and the southwestern United States, they brought these methods with them. The people who practiced this kind of cattle herding were known as vaqueros, from the Spanish word vaca, meaning cow. These vaqueros were highly skilled. They introduced techniques like roping, branding, and herding cattle across vast distances, skills that would later define what we think of as cowboy work. By the 1700s and 1800s, as American settlers moved westward, they adopted many of these practices. Over time, the English-speaking version of the role emerged, and with it a new name, the cowboy. So here's the key point. Cowboys weren't defined by riding horses. They were defined by working with cattle. Their main job was to manage herds of cows. That included driving cattle across long distances, protecting them from predators, guiding them to grazing areas, and eventually bringing them to markets or railheads. Horses weren't the focus, they were the tool. Think of it like this. A taxi driver isn't called a car person, even though they spend all day driving. The vehicle is just part of the job. For cowboys, horses were essential, but the real work was all about cows. Without horses, managing large herds over open land would have been nearly impossible. But the goal wasn't riding, it was controlling and caring for cattle efficiently. The word cowboy breaks down pretty literally, someone who handles cows. The term started appearing in English in the 18th century. Cow referred to cattle, and boy was often used historically to describe a young worker or laborer, not necessarily a child. In fact, similar naming patterns existed in other professions like shepherd boys or stable boys. At first, cowboy didn't even have the cool, rugged image we associate with it today. In some contexts, it was actually used negatively, referring to inexperienced or low-status workers. In the American colonies, the term could even describe cattle thieves or unruly individuals. It wasn't until the late 1800s that the image began to shift. After the American Civil War, the cattle industry boomed in places like Texas. There were millions of cattle that needed to be moved north to railroads, where they could be shipped to cities. This led to the rise of the great cattle drives, long journeys where cowboys guided herds across hundreds of miles. These drives required skill, endurance, and teamwork, and they cemented the cowboy's role as a key figure in the expansion of the American West. During this time, the term cowboy became more widely used and accepted. It described the people doing this demanding work, riding horses, yes, but always in service of managing cattle. If cowboys were just workers, how did they become legends? The answer lies in storytelling. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, dime novels, Wild West shows, and later Hollywood films began romanticizing the cowboy lifestyle. Figures like Buffalo Bill helped turn cowboys into symbols of adventure, independence, and toughness. Movies and television took it even further. Cowboys were no longer just cattle herders, they became heroes, lawmen, and lone wanderers. The horse, once just a practical tool, became a central part of the image. Because of this, modern audiences often associate cowboys more with riding horses than with working cattle. But historically, the job and the name always revolved around cows. So, why didn't a name based on horses stick instead? Because horseback riding wasn't unique to cowboys. Soldiers, messengers, explorers, and travelers all used horses. What made cowboys different was their specialization in cattle work. If the term had focused on horses, it wouldn't have distinguished them from other riders. The word cowboy clearly defined their role and purpose. It told you exactly what they worked with. In other words, the name highlights what made them unique, not the tool they used. Today, the word cowboy has taken on meanings far beyond its original job description. In some contexts, it still refers to real ranch workers who manage cattle, especially in places like Texas, Australia, and parts of South America. In others, it describes a certain attitude, independent, bold, sometimes even rebellious. You'll even hear the term used metaphorically, like calling someone a cowboy for taking risks or bending the rules. But despite all these meanings, the origin remains the same, a worker whose job centered on cows. So why are they called cowboys if they just ride horses? Because they don't just ride horses. The horse was never the point. It was the means to do the job. Cowboys were cattle workers first and riders second, and their name reflects exactly that. It's a small reminder that words often carry history with them. What seems confusing at first starts to make sense when you look at where it came from. And in this case, the name cowboy isn't misleading at all. It's just more honest than we realized. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of simple things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories woven through the smallest details.